starts his remarks. So hello, welcome everyone to Chamber Live, defining the new airport operation and air travel experience. My name is Kaylee Worski and I am the event coordinator here at the Greater Sudbury Chamber of Commerce. I would like to thank our presenting sponsor, Eastlink. Eastlink is happy to be sponsoring the Chamber Live series designed to help support businesses by providing an opportunity to learn and network with other entrepreneurs. Thank you, Eastlink, for your continued support. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that today's Chamber Live will be recorded and will be made available under the resource section on our website. We would also like to encourage you to use the Q&A box to ask any questions during this presentation to be answered by JM towards the end. We're so honored to have Jean-Mathieu Chenier, Director of Marketing at the Airport Excellence and Innovation at the Greater Sudbury Airport. Thank you for being here today, and I'll now turn it over to you, JM.
Great, thanks, Kelly, and thank you everyone for attending. I'd like just a quick shout out to a few people I saw on the list here. So Todd Tripp is the Greater Sudbury Airport CEO. I noticed Todd Cochran, who's a board member of the Sudbury Airport Community Development Corporation, and again also to everyone else from the Sudbury Airport team who's signed on and listening in. Yeah, to begin, like I said, thank you to the Chamber and Eastlink for hosting this presentation. If you had questions around air travel and specifically what air travel will be like at the Greater Sudbury Airport, I will cover some of those details today and answer any questions you may have. As Kelly mentioned, the presentation is being recorded. So a little bit about the presentation today, obviously about us, about the Greater Sudbury Airport. I'm going to speak to the status of Canadian and regional airports in general, and that'll be my little bit of advocacy on behalf of smaller and regional airports across Canada. Also, what to expect as the new airport experience, the role of the passenger in air travel today, and then what the future of aviation could look like. Before we start, I wanted to poll our attendees today and ask, when do you next expect to use air travel from the Greater Sudbury Airport? I will give us all about 20 seconds to complete this. Simply click the box that most represents when you are expecting to travel next. That's great. You can see the numbers really racking up. That's great. Give it another 5 seconds or so. Okay, thank you. And Callie, can you give us an overview of the answers? Actually, I don't know if you can still see it on your screen, but I'll let Callie report on some of the answers.
Sure. Yeah, it looks like a majority of our participants today will be planning to travel within the next 6 months. Yeah, within the next 6 months to a year, most of our attendees are thinking about traveling.
Great, thanks. And before I move on to my presentation, I do want to take this time to personally thank all the essential frontline employees, service providers, and airline partners at the Greater Sudbury Airport for the work they have done during the COVID crisis. I mean, despite air travel being dramatically decreased, the airport is required to maintain essential and emergency service to medevac travel, firefighting, air support, cargo, and essential worker air travel. So thank you so much to the dedicated men and women whose unwavering commitment helps maintain essential airport operations. So COVID-19 definitely has created an unprecedented global challenge, particularly to the aviation industry. Governments rapidly restricted travel and closed borders to limit the spread. This had a drastic and detrimental effect on regional airports like the Greater Sudbury Airport and frankly airports worldwide. A survey conducted by the Regional Canadian Airports Council in the last week of April 2020 indicated airports reporting losses as high as 90%. And that's definitely consistent with what we're seeing at our airport. For airport operators, our main focus is to protect the health and welfare of travelers and to maintain efficient airport operations. A variety of new and ever-changing measures have come into effect that we will identify in the presentation today. So pre-COVID, just a little bit of information about the Greater Sudbury Airport. just to put into perspective on where we were as a regional airport and where we are now. So pre-COVID, the Greater Sudbury Airport managed upwards of 280,000 passengers annually, up to 45,000 pieces of cargo annually. Support within the broader context, 317 full-time equivalent jobs locally. Again, another, several hundred jobs provincially and nationally. And we contributed to the economic impact to the tune of $96 million in gross domestic product. So I think, the airport definitely is an economic pillar to the community and to the communities that airports serve across Canada as that link to the rest of the world. Now, a little bit about our governance. So the Sudbury Airport Community Development Corporation essentially manages the Greater Sudbury Airport. And the SCCDC is a not-for-profit, non-share capital corporation. It manages the Greater Sudbury Airport. It's comprised of 11 members, 11-member board of directors that oversees the affairs of the airport. We're independent, financially self-sustainable, and again, as a corporation under the Ontario Corporations Act. And we do not receive financial assistance from the municipal tax base. Now, again, a little bit about the governance model. The SCCDC was formed and assumed ownership and governance of the Greater Sudbury Airport following the transfer from Transport Canada on March 31st, 2000. And as I mentioned, the SCCDC operates as an independent, financially self-sustainable corporation. We do not receive municipal funds. We do not, or frankly, funds from other levels of government for our operations. The status of the Greater Sudbury Airport. So this, it's the regional airports that provide that social, economic, medical connectivity for the overwhelming share of Canada's vast geography. Regional airports like Greater Sudbury have three main sources of revenue. Aeronautical fees, which essentially, that's what you're talking about, landing fees and aircraft parking fees and whatnot. Non-aeronautical fees, so that's parking, retailers, real estate development. And then airport improvement fees, or which are also called passenger facility fees, and that's basically the fees that you see on your airline ticket when you buy. The airlines collect it on our behalf, and that's again, fees that we collect to help run and maintain the airport. Now, regional airports typically experience higher cost per passenger and aircraft movement. Regional airports usually have low land values with limited revenues from land development. We have extremely limited ability to earn non-aeronautical revenues from terminal services such as food, beverage, and retail. I mean, a simple example, right? I mean, if you're flying into Pearson or any other large airport, whenever you get through security, I mean, it's almost like stepping into a shopping mall sometimes, I mean, with all the vendors, and that all contributes to non-aeronautical revenue for an airport. Unfortunately, smaller airports just don't have, the size of market and those economies of scale to be able to offer those services, but also, again, in terms of the higher cost per flight, we have a higher level of fixed cost. Air carriers operating smaller aircraft have higher cost per passenger kilometer than mainline services, and they are more sensitive to airport charges such as landing fees. Extremely low airline and passenger traffic volumes have a direct impact on air carrier revenue, but also on non-aeronautical revenue, as fewer people traveling through an airport mean fewer people to shop or eat in the airport service businesses. Now, again, I mean, that's across the board in Canada as we speak to our peers across the board. And I mean, one only needs to see how empty our parking lot is today to know that that's, we're definitely feeling that decrease in revenue. So the federal government announced financial relief to some airport authorities across Canada, but these national airport system airports while they're independently operated, they are on federally owned lands and they pay rent to the federal government. The majority of the smaller regional airports across Canada operate under a different model whereby a local authority or municipality, which is the case for Sudbury, owns the airport infrastructure. So in some cases, I mentioned we have a development corporation that owns and manages. In some cases, in the I think Timmins, for example, they're essentially a department of the municipality. Just you have a director of roads, and you have a director of transit, and you have a director of airport services. So and those models vary across the country. At this time, there hasn't been any funding relief offered to smaller airports across the country, including us. With the majority of our revenues linked to passenger traffic, our primary sources have seen a dramatic decrease, as I spoke to already. Despite these financial challenges, we are still required as an essential service to remain open and maintain our standard airfield operations from a regulatory perspective, which again entails a level of fixed costs that we just, just can't get around. The Greater Sudbury Airport, we were served by a number of airlines, Air Canada, Porter Airlines, Bearskin Airlines, Prop Air, Sunwing, and Wasaya Airlines. Currently, Air Canada and Bearskin, and then Wasaya has charters, as does Prop Air. And that's a little bit of a difference that we're seeing now, which is a positive sign because you're still seeing people fly through, is that, as connectivity, not to pick on any one airline, but some airlines have pulled out entirely out of certain markets. We're fortunate to still have Air Canada and Bearskin as, sort of regular mainstays where you can buy an airline ticket. And as I said, Prop Air and Wasaya offering charters. And you're seeing the charter flights increase a little bit because, again, those remote mines, they're still open. They were always still classified as an essential service. And so those mines still need their workers to get to work. And so you're seeing the mining companies charter flights more so than, buying that airline ticket that they would have done, just a few months ago. Now, the Greater Sudbury Airport is fortunate to be a member of many strong aviation organizations and then that we work alongside. I just want to take a minute to introduce them to you. So we hold active membership in ACINA, which is Airports Council International North America. And ACI, Airports Council International, acts as the voice of the world's airports. They develop standards, policies, recommended practices for airports, and provides information and training opportunities to raise, to raise awareness, but also raise standards around the world. Now, CAC is the Canadian Airports Council. They act as the voice of Canada's airports specifically. They work to ensure that Canada's airports have the regulatory and operational tools they need by advocating for policies that strengthen the ability of Canada's airports to serve the travelers and communities. Now the CAC, again, we continue to work quite closely with them. Between Todd, myself, Robert, and others on the management team, we sit in weekly calls, just again, understand what's going on, but also again to continue pushing and advocating for the cash crunch that we're facing. And we're happy to see that CAC does have the ear of the federal government, and again, we continue to use those mechanisms to to continue pushing for what airports to highlight what airports are facing, but also to to continue advocating for what we need to continue to survive and thrive. Now, the Regional Community Airports Council, that's a national organization dedicated to promoting the viability of regional and community airports across Canada. So again, the Sudburys, the Grand Prairies of the world, the Sault Ste. Marie's of the world, of the Canadian airports form part of this membership. And again, what's troubling a Pearson or Vancouver International is very different than what affects Sudbury and these other regional airports. And so again, it just to strengthen our collective voice as smaller airports. Now, the Northern Ontario Airports Network, and now this is a regional association of Northern Ontario airports, and we just started this this past fall. And so again, we're working together on synergistic projects that help support the growth of the aviation industry across Northern Ontario. And again, we're continuing to look to expand and grow on that. Because again, regional airports, as I mentioned earlier, we are that connectivity point. I mean, sure, Sudbury is a relatively short drive to Toronto, but CU Lookout isn't. And, they are really the key connectivity point to many remote and First Nations communities across Northern Ontario. And if they're not able to survive because their revenues are down, it really does pose a real challenge to some of those remote communities. So Canada's regional airports, as I said, play critical roles in economic, social, and medical connectivity, both for passenger and cargo, for Canada's smaller remote communities. While the larger Canadian airports receive some degree of relief, with the government agreeing not to collect land rental fees from those 21 major airports, the fees that they pay are based on revenues that they generate. So, again, you always love how the things get spun, but, sort of last year, the federal government collected, over $300 million in rent. And so they equated the value of the rent relief to that. And it's like, well, no, you collected $300 million because passenger numbers were high and revenues were high at those airports. So if they're not making any revenue, it really is a minimal relief, if you will. And of course, this doesn't impact or assist the smaller regional airlines, airports across Canada at all, as I mentioned, because we're not part of that. We're not part of that model. We don't have federally owned lands. We don't operate on federally owned lands. The SCCDC owns our land. Just to put into perspective, aviation is characterized by a high degree of interdependency, right? I mean, you within hours, you're flying from one entirely different jurisdiction to the other. And so, airports have an equal role to play in the recovery of post-COVID-19. The America Cares Act was a $10 billion package awarded to eligible US airports as relief grants. It's great that the government has provided some stimulus for airlines. However, stimulus for airlines alone will not provide a balanced recovery. Aviation is, as I mentioned, is characterized by a high degree of interdependency. And so airports have an equal role to play in the recovery post-COVID-19. The CARES Act, or the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, as I mentioned, is a $10 billion in funds awarded to airports, and it leaves Canadian airports at a competitive disadvantage. For the US AIP program, they've increased the federal share to 100%, and new supplemental grants are already planned for 2020. So again, in some cases where there's capital dollars going to airports, it's typically expected that the airport would kick in some of the, a share of funding. While in the US, they've said, no, you know what, we'll pay 100% of those. And so this means that airports are not required to provide those matching project costs. This allows critical safety and capacity projects to continue as planned, regardless of the airport's current financial circumstances. That's another thing, right? We're hearing from, say, policymakers that, well, okay, we'll increase the funding going, but you still have to come up with your share. But we're saying, that's great, but we don't have a share. Like, we're running in the red right now. Where do you want us to get the money to come up with our share? All commercial service airports with more than 10,000 annual passengers will receive additional funds based on their number of annual boardings, the amount of debt it has, and the amount of money it has in reserve. So again, without getting into too much detail about this CARES Act, it's just to say that that's, south of the border, they're getting this funding relief, and unfortunately, we're not getting anything. So some of Canada's regional airports are facing bankruptcy and potentially permanent closure. Again, like to think that the federal government's not going to let that happen. But if you're an airport that just a few years ago, went through a massive rebuilding and capital improvement project and have loans to pay to repay that, and you're basing your financial projections, as many other businesses are in that situation today. How are you going to pay that debt if your money's not coming in and as you expected? Some of those other programs, like the Canada Employment Wage Subsidy Program, for example, a lot of us are not eligible for the general COVID business aid programs due to their governance model. Several regional airports are operated by municipality, as I mentioned, and thus they're ineligible for the COVID wage or loan support programs. And at the time airports were transferred, Transport Canada had encouraged the use of municipal-owned governance models, because it just seemed good, sort of transferring from one government to the next to some extent. But again, it doesn't help many of these smaller and regional airports that are automatically not allowed to apply because they form part of the government, despite the fact that, again, in our case, we're entirely self-sufficient, but we still have a linkage to the city and how and some of the policies and how we operate. And so it becomes a little sticky when we're trying to apply for that funding, and we're still fighting for it to be able to apply now. Basically, what we're asking is an immediate support program for regional airports. I mean, that's what needed. I mean, there's an immediate need to replace lost revenues. We suggest that all airports, regardless of ownership model, be eligible for up to 75% revenue replacement to the end of the year, so that airports don't face immediate financial failure and permanent closure. And whether this would need to be continued due to slow traffic recovery, again, that would have to be revised. All regional airports should be made eligible for zero interest medium-term loans, as private businesses have been able to access. Again, regardless of airport ownership model, when it divested the regional airports, again, we shouldn't be punished today for the fact of how things were running. And again, I'm not speaking of just Greater Sudbury Airport, but as I mentioned, this is a little bit of our advocacy on smaller and regional airports across Canada. And airports receiving grants, again, we're prepared to agree to reduce aeronautical charges by 50% during 2020 to improve airline economics and stimulate passenger demand. So, again, while we're asking for some aid, we're also willing to relax some of our fees to not see, again, to encourage passenger growth again and see people come back to flying. Now, the ACAP funding, or Airport Capital Assistance Program, was created in the mid-90s to assist airports with financial projects related to safety, asset protection, and operating cost reduction. The government recognized that airports with less than 500,000 passengers would require access to some varying levels of financial assistance in order to maintain safe and secure airport infrastructure for the traveling public. Today, approximately 200 regional and local airports are eligible for ACAP funding, which has been capped at $38 million a year despite inflation. So, I mean, one project can cost $8 or $9 million or $15 million. And so you chew into that $30 million pretty quick with just a handful of airports. ACAP funding needs to be increased to $95 million, which includes an adjustment to reflect 25 years of inflation, and also to allow a wider range of projects that can be funded, especially for facility rehabilitation. And again, there's other benefits to ACAP. I mean, by funding ACAP program, it generates construction jobs in the community and communities across Canada that can access this. So enough about my soapbox and pitch on the woes of regional airports. I'm going to switch now to the new airport operation and air travel experience. Now, just to point out, I mean, these are the different organizations that we're working with. Transport Canada, obviously, the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority, Health Canada, and public health agencies, and of course our airline partners. It's important to note that Transport Canada is the regulator. And again, it's a heavily regulated industry, as I mentioned, for all the right reasons, for safety and everything else. Whether it's, the air carriers have their own set of rules that they have to abide by, and then which, is intertwines with the rules that the airports have to abide by. Now, CATSA, those are the screening agents. That's the whole get undressed to get through and then get back dressed up once you get your stuff scanned and all that. So, that's all great, but again, they each play a role in how we're trying to manage sort of this next step. So Greater Sudbury Airport Travel Care Plus. At this time, only airline passengers and airport personnel are allowed in the terminal. So again, the loved one that's coming to pick you up, unfortunately, will have to wait in the car until you walk out of the airport. Again, we're just trying to limit the number of people that enter the terminal for health and safety reasons. We also have a limited number of passengers that are allowed in the terminal. Now, at this point in time, with the numbers being so low, it hasn't come up yet where somebody has to actually stand outside. But similar to your experience going to the grocery store, right? I mean, there's a security person at the door and they're only allowing so many in, and as people come out, then they allow you in. And so, again, expect sort of a similar scenario. Facial coverings are required inside the terminal. We've implemented a number of physical distancing measures, everything from, the stickers on the floor that say, to maintain physical distancing and that's 6 feet or 2 meters apart. We've put signs on certain seating to allow for more spacing between seats. Even just the general terminal flow, it's sort of one direction, one way all the way around. We're trying to minimize anyone from crisscrossing each other. We have, enhanced sanitization of the terminal. So again, as, plane arrives, people come through the arrivals area, pick up their bags, maybe go to the bathroom, maybe pick up a rental car and leave. Our cleaning staff, our contracted cleaning staff are in there cleaning all high touch points, regularly cleaning bathrooms and so on. And likewise, again, as the flight leaves, they're sort of doing that sweep and following where people would have gone and cleaning those high touch points and making sure that, we keep things clean and sanitized. We've put up protective shields at the service desks, both at check-in counters and at, the gate when you check out, or sort of the gate when you're about to board. Some of the employee protocols. So our airport employees, tenants, and contractors are screened daily. So again, if I happen to go in the office, I've been working from home for the most part, but I do go in from time to time, but there are people who are there every day. They're screened and asked the same questions every single day about, how whether you're exhibiting symptoms and whatnot, have you traveled, etc. Everyone is required to wear a facial covering inside the terminal. We have inter-office document handling protocols. And again, the physical distancing, extra reminders on hand washing, vehicle sanitization protocols implemented. So again, we have equipment, and as people climb in and out of equipment, that's being sanitized. Again, to make sure that we're doing our part to minimize the spread. So another poll question. So if Callie can bring that up. So do you fly through the Sudbury Airport most for business travel? Do you fly most for leisure travel, or is it for other reasons, medical or other travel? So again, we'll give folks, 15 or 20 seconds to answer. And so far from the results I'm seeing, I'm not overly surprised since we are talking to a business crowd right now.
Yeah, so it looks like majority of our participants have answered the poll, and majority travel for business.
Yeah, I'd say that 2/3 to 1/3 business over leisure. So again, not surprising the crowd, but also not surprising of what we see in our terminal. I mean, we know that the majority of our travelers are business travelers. So this, again, not surprising, but we're always, what is that number? That 75%, is it 40%? But it's good to see and to get that understanding. So thank you. So air travel and passenger requirements. So while the airport and the airlines and all of the various partners that help make this work are, we're doing our part. There definitely is a part that the passenger has to play, or that we're asking passengers to play. First and foremost, check with your airline prior to booking your travel. I can't stress that enough. I mean, subscribe to the airline alerts. Get the app that whatever airline you're flying with. Make sure you're getting those alerts. Check the airline's website for information, and give yourself extra time. Again, smaller airports, people that are used to using smaller airports, tend to be spoiled because they can, and I get it. I work there, and sometimes I do the same thing, right? Which, you sort of, going through screening and doing what you have to do at the last minute because, again, it's not Pearson. It's not thousands of people going through the terminal. It's dozens at a time at most. And so I would say during this time, give yourself a little bit extra time. Right now, again, the lineups aren't long because there are still very few passengers traveling. I mean, the economy still isn't completely open. And so people are starting to travel a little bit more, but just be aware of that in the coming weeks and months that, as things pick up, depending on how, depending on, the ongoing public health agency guidelines and whatnot, but just to expect that things may take a little bit longer today than they did a few months ago. Again, we are asking passengers to wear face coverings. Now, to be clear, there are certain regulatory pieces around, through screening in particular, you're mandated to. You're mandated to wear it, as you're going through the boarding process and on the plane and everything else. So again, be ready with a mask, have your mask, be ready to put it on as you're entering the terminal. There will be health checks at airline service counters. Again, they're mandated to do so by their regulatory, again, by the regulatory authorities. As I mentioned, it's only passengers and people who work in the terminal that have any business in the terminal at this point in time. And again, you'll see lots of signage in our airport in particular, but others are doing the same. But in terms of remembering the physical distancing and hand sanitization, and I get it. I mean, these days you're seeing, well, there's next to no cases in Northern Ontario, and people are starting to be a little more laxed. And I mean, that's fine. Everybody's going to do things at their own comfort level, but just be ready and don't be shocked that if it's sort of back to a higher level of diligence when it comes to going through the airport, because I mean, don't forget, I mean, that's the virus spread quickly around the world thanks to global travel. So another question, how many times last year, so in 2019, did you travel for business, leisure, medical, or other through the Greater Sudbury Airport? So specifically through the airport, how many times did you travel? So thanks, I'm seeing a lot of votes coming in. So I think that's about it. Oh, a few more.
Quite a few that are 20 plus, which is interesting.
Yeah, there's a few, frequent flyers there, and then the majority are in the 1 to 5 or 5 to 10. Okay, thanks everyone. So, we are in this together. Our commitment remains ensuring the safety and well-being of our airline passengers, airport employees, and our community. Just as many of you are looking forward to traveling and visiting new destinations, we at the Greater Sudbury Airport are working to ensure our airport is ready to connect to the world once again when it's safe to do so. Obviously, in your next travel plans, please choose to fly Sudbury. We will be circulating a survey. I know we kind of polled for a handful of questions. So there's ACI&A has provided airports with survey questions and won't take more than a few minutes to answer. And Callie, I believe that will be circulated to the members, or at least to those who are on the call.
Yep, it will.
Great. And so we do ask that you take a few minutes to answer that. Any information does help us. I mean, again, getting that understanding of who's traveling first, the type, sort of the person, the persona of who's flying first. Is it the business person? Is it the, I'm going to see, grandma out east because she's not doing well and I haven't been able to travel for 3 months. I mean, whatever that any information you can provide is definitely helpful for us and will help us in manage. And again, as we all know, things have changed, week to week, day to day, month to month. And so this will be an evolving sort of challenge that we're all faced with. And so just a few important websites on that. I mean, if you have your phone ready, take a picture or, screen capture it on your computer. Obviously Transport Canada, or the government of Canada in general, in terms of they're the ones that are deciding when the border's going to open and not, but Transport Canada has some of those regulatory pieces. CATSA, as I mentioned, they're in charge of screening, and so they have certain protocols. Obviously, follow public health guidelines. And not only, it's one thing to look at Public Health Agency of Canada or, Public Health Ontario. Look at the local public health agency where you're traveling. So know that, example, earlier in the week and over the last couple of weeks, you're seeing some provinces that are opening up completely. So the rules are different in certain provinces over others, depending on where they're at. And, even if the border starts to open, even within the states that you're going to or maybe going to, there are different public health guidelines and rules. And so, stay informed, do your research before you leave. And then obviously, visit our website, flysudbury.ca. And certainly if you are not connected to our social media outlets, please look us up on Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms to stay informed. So I'll gladly take questions. I'll answer the first one for you. If you want to know about getting a refund on your airline ticket, please contact your airline. The airport has no secret back door that we can access to see if we can refund. Unfortunately, we're like everyone else. We have to call a 1-800, wait for hours to talk to someone to find out if we, how and when we can get our refund or credit. So I'll just answer that one right now because I know that's probably one that we always get. Other than that, again, happy to answer any questions.
Sure. We have a question here. Are passengers expected to bring their own face masks?
Now, some airlines are providing a face mask, but I would suggest to bring your own just to avoid the hassle. I think it might just be easier to bring your own. And now the face mask, if you look at even Transport Canada has some guidelines in terms of face coverings. I mean, it doesn't have to be N95. It doesn't have to be, medical grade or anything like that. They're just stating that, sort of double line cotton and as long as there's loops that go around the ear or that you're able to tie it so that, your nose and mouth is covered. So again, on the government websites, there are some guidelines that you can read up on. But yes, I mean, again, like I said, some airlines have some readily available, others do not. I think we have some in our vending machine now, and don't be surprised to see that in airports everywhere now to see, selling face masks in vending machines. But I mean, the simple answer is, you might be better off carrying your own.
Great, thank you. Another question here. What will check-in, security, and post-security look like in regards to social distancing?
Well, now again, at our airport, for those who are familiar with the airport, and right before you go into screening, if there's a long lineup, then like any other airport, right? So you have those stanchions up and everybody's kind of herded in there like cattle and everybody's close together. But we've actually, because no one can actually, the seating area and the arrivals area, so we've actually made the lineup and extended it quite a bit with floor markings. So when you're in line, and that's part of what we're trying to do, is manage that flow of passengers, right? So we're aware that, X number of people can only stand up through the check-in process, say at any given airline desk. And once you reach that maximum, then we're not letting anybody else in. And then as you proceed through, again, we're always aware of that. Now, obviously, right now, it's not an issue because there's, not too many people flying. But as that picks up, we're going to be, we're going to have to remain diligent about allowing only the number of people in where we can still maintain that physical distancing as much as possible. Now, that's where the face mask comes in, obviously, is that when that's not possible, which is, again, the case in an airplane, we can manage that physical distancing as much as we can throughout the terminal. But the bottom line is, you're getting into a small metal tube in the air. And so, at this point in time, we know of airlines that are not selling more than, say 50% capacity of the plane to allow for some spacing. But nonetheless, yes, you can expect that, you will be directed to go a certain way throughout the terminal, and all of that is in place to maximize our ability to physically distance people.
Thank you. Another question here. Will parking fees be increased to help defray any added expenses you are experiencing through COVID-19?
At this point in time, we have no plans to, increase parking fees or other fees today. Again, we're going to try to look at, again, continuing to maintain those operations as efficiently as possible. And, we've already cut a number of capital projects this year to, again, help with our bank accounts at this point in time. So, I can't say what's going to happen in 2 years from now or a year and a half, or whether, that's another common question that I'll sort of address right now is on the cost. People are asking, okay, is my airline ticket is the price of an airline ticket going to increase? Well, all of these costs, whether it's the fees that airport charges or, airlines having to, again, recover and maintain their financial health. You're already seeing it in other aspects, right? The latest talk of price increases is in food. So while gas is down because nobody's burning any gas, food prices have gone up because of, again, whether it's food processing plants that have been affected by COVID and have had to shut down, or they've had to implement measures. The bottom line is we're all facing increased costs, airlines, airports. And so, again, in the short term, I'm saying no, but I can't, it's difficult to see. It's difficult to say what's going to happen to our fee structure. How long is this going to impact us, right? If things start to turn around and things start to pick up, and then we're okay. But all of a sudden you get a second wave that hits, and then we're back to what March, April, and May and June has looked like this year. If the fourth quarter looks like the second quarter, what does that mean for air travel in 2021 and 2022? A lot of the industry information that's being talked about on the aviation side is that we're not going to see 2019 passenger numbers for at least 3 or 4 years. And so, the shorter answer is there's no immediate plan to increase costs, or increase fees rather.
Great, thank you. Another question here. What are longer term plans by Porter and Air Canada on service levels?
Well, I can only say what's been publicly stated. I mean, that's all we know. I mean, right now, Porter's announced, I mean, they were sort of first to pull out right when the pandemic was announced. Within by the third week of March, I think they had ceased all operations to everywhere that they serve, and then they've recently extended that to the end of July, I believe. And so, again, they're gonna, they're sort of in a wait and see approach as well. What's going to happen with the economy? Is it going to turn around before they decide? And even when they do decide, I mean, I can't imagine them serving the smaller markets before they start igniting before they start serving the larger markets, like the, Toronto to Boston and New York once the border opens, or, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa corridor type thing. As far as, again, frequency, I mean, that's going to be driven by demand. We've already seen some changes. I mean, in April, Air Canada has pulled out of some markets altogether for the time being. As for Sudbury, I mean, we were fortunate enough to keep our service. I mean, we have a good relationship with the airlines, and we were able to keep the service. And plus, I think, being the larger city in Northern Ontario, the market's there a little bit more than some of the smaller stations they were serving. But if you look at Air Canada in April, they were one flight a day, 7 days a week. In May, they went down to Monday, Wednesday, Friday only, one flight, so 3 flights per week. At some point in time, and if you're looking, I always sort of look, okay, can I buy a ticket in 2 weeks? And what does it look like if I buy a ticket in 2 months, just to see what availability of flights are? And so it looked like they were, considering increasing the number of flights per day out of Sudbury, and then they went back down to the 1 flight a day. So it looked like they were going 2 flights a day, and then quickly retracted and went back to 1 flight a day. So, they're basing that. They have information that we don't, right? I mean, when somebody buys a ticket in a week, 2 weeks, 6 months from now, it's not like we know that. We only find out after they've flown how many people were on the plane. And so, no one can predict that. I think they're gonna continue to monitor their ticket sales and then increase the frequency of flights based on passenger demand.
Great, thanks. Another question here. Will the restaurant be open at the airport, and will airlines be offering food and beverages on flights, or can passengers bring their own food?
So the first question around the restaurant is closed. The restaurant has been closed since March, again, with virtually, very limited number of passengers. And just to give you an idea, I mean, you would see, a lot of us have flown Air Canada, for example, on the Dash 8-300, which is, 50 passengers, and there's not a seat left. Whereas now, you're seeing 3 or 4 people, sometimes 10 people get on or off a plane. So, just to give you an indication of the drop in passenger traffic. So the restaurant, there's no viability for the restaurant to stay open at this point in time. We continue to obviously have conversations with the owner to see when that might be ready. But again, we know right now that the passenger numbers just don't justify opening a restaurant. And so as far as airlines providing food, I mean, I know a lot of them are providing sort of a health pack, right? Sort of a, here's your individual hand sanitizer, and here's your wipe and everything else to clean the spot you're sitting on, despite the fact that they had, very much increased their sanitization protocols on the plane. But, everybody has a different level of comfort, and some people like to clean their own tray and seats. As far as food, from what I'm understanding, they're not really doing that at this point in time. But, again, you can always bring your own. Pack a sandwich, pack a snack. I mean, for the 45-minute flight between Sudbury and Toronto, most people won't starve. But even when you get to Toronto, I mean, restaurants, and this is again across the board, not just Pearson, but I mean restaurants across North America. When we're listening to, like I said, our weekly conference calls, many food concessions are closed or they're slowly reopening, and so the number and selection is significantly reduced. So my tip, I guess, would be to pack yourself a little snack.
Thanks, JM. Just to clarify, are there any restaurants at Pearson open?
I don't know. I mean, I suspect that they have and still enough passengers to justify some restaurants, but certainly anything that's open would be grab and go, because again, by provincial legislation, right, there's no seating or anything like that. So, you know, there's no restaurants and bars open where you're allowed to just sit down, but there would be sort of that, you know, grab and go type service. So grab a sandwich, grab a bottle of water, and be on your way.
Great, we've got time for a couple more questions. So one is, how many people are allowed in the area past security? If limiting people in the airport, there is a chance of missing a flight because of the secure area's overcapacity.
Well, you know, again, at this point in time, within the secured area, you know, again, that, yes, there is limited space. So we will, like, people are still allowed into that secured area. I mean, right now, you know, it hasn't been an issue where it's tight in there by any stretch of the imagination. So as things increase, I mean, yeah, it might get a little tighter in there. And so, and that's where the, you know, the mask comes in, but you will not be left behind. I mean, you'll be left behind if you show up too late and you don't have time to go through the proper, you know, check-in and screening areas, but like any other time. But at this point in time, you're not going to be left behind. I mean, you won't be denied entry into the secured area. What we're trying to do is, as much as we can, manage that. Once you're past the security screening and you're in that hold room waiting to board, we're not going to limit the number of people that can go in there. And again, that's where you know, the requirement for a mask comes in, because at least it's providing you know, that added measure of safety, because you're not able to physical distance. Again, right now you can, and again, we're hopeful that as things pick up, things are picking up, because you know, the health concerns are not as bad as they were, you know, as they are today, as they were a month ago, as they were 2 months ago. So hopefully, as you know, more and more people are traveling, because the restrictions are not there, because it's not as much of a health concern. But regardless, I mean, we're still going to manage that flow as much as we can. But yeah, no one will be left behind. You will not be denied entry into the boarding, into the boarding area. It just means that, you know, again, you know, back to wearing that mask, and should physical distancing not become more and more difficult.
Thanks. Another question here. What's been the operational level, especially with Air Canada, delays, cancellations, and crew availability?
Sir, can you ask that question again?
Yep. What has been the operational level, especially with Air Canada, delays, cancellations, crew availability?
Well, I mean, at this time, we haven't seen any. I mean, earlier on, when the crisis was happening, I mean, sure, that was different. I mean, March was very different than today. Right now, there are no issues. I mean, the planes that are scheduled to come in are coming in, and they're leaving when they're coming in when they're supposed to, and they're leaving when they're supposed to. I mean, you know, again, unforeseen weather events and that sort of thing notwithstanding, but at this point in time, we haven't seen any issues with you know, crew shortages or you know, plane not coming and going as it's supposed to. Again, notwithstanding, you know, mechanical or weather related issues, but we haven't really even seen any of those lately.
Great, thanks. One last question. If we do miss any of your questions, please note that I will provide JM's contact information in the follow-up email, and you can message him directly. So our last question is, has Porter indicated when or if they're going to be restarting operations?
Yes, they have indicated that they intend on returning. As I mentioned, their plan is the end of July, or beginning of August. You know, again, they've already pushed that date a couple of times, so who knows? But yes, the intention is that they intend on coming back. Short answer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And as our time draws to an end, I'd like to thank JM Chenier from the Greater Sudbury Airport for being here today and sharing insight on what air travel from Sudbury will look like. I would also like to thank our attendees for their participation. We hope you found this webinar helpful. If you have any questions about how the Chamber can assist your business, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of our staff members. Their email address can be found on our website. The Chamber has also developed a COVID-19 resource page and a reopening toolkit on our website. Visit sudburychamber.ca to learn more, and please watch our social media feeds for more webinar topics in the upcoming weeks. On behalf of the Chamber, thank you all for joining us, and thank you for your continued support. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.